I have been struck repeatedly since October 7th by the following, and I would like you to, agree or disagree in much more elaborate form, which is for most of the time growing up, anytime anything happened on the West Bank or Gaza or between the Israelis and the Palestinians, like all the Arab states would get together and they would condemn Israel and they would talk about what we're going to do, and the price of oil would spike and the world would freak out and the UN would have meetings. And while there have certainly been vast amounts of blowback about Israel's actions in Gaza, in New York and London, and I guess there was a brief moment in Istanbul in November of 2023, and in Indonesia for a brief moment around the same time, like the Arab world it's like you could hear a pin drop when it comes to public actual outcry. Maybe social media, there's been more. Certainly people express their outcry more on social media than they do in person. Just that's the world we're living in. And even more striking has been the fact that the Abraham Accords, the peace agreements between the Gulf states and Israel, have not only held, but seem to have held without without like a blink or a boo. So what do you think's going on there? Is it just like, the Gulf states, Qatar, which is trying to be neutral, have just decided that like Iran's the real enemy here, and if Israel's fighting a proxy war kind of on our side with Iran, that's kind of a good thing? Or economically, the future is with Israel, not with Islamic fundamentalism? I don't know.
I think all of the above. So one of the striking things about this conflict, and given the backdrop of the death and destruction in the Gaza Strip, as well as what's unfolded in Lebanon in recent weeks, what's been striking about this is how stable Israel's diplomatic relations actually are with its neighbors, but mostly with its partners within the Abraham Accords. There's been a lot in the press and elsewhere about Israel being isolated in the globe. Kind of like, where? It is true that the Bahrainis don't have an ambassador in Israel. The Moroccans don't have an ambassador in Israel. The Emiratis do. The Egyptians have maintained their ambassador in Israel throughout, and all of these countries continue a robust dialogue with them. And I think that the calculation, particularly among the Abraham Accords countries, has been that, one, economic development and prosperity in the region requires integration in the region. And Israel, the little country that is startup nation, tech, hot house, etc., can be a driver of that economic development, along with, tied up with all these other countries. And then, of course, as you articulated, everybody sees Iran as a threat. And one of the kind of stunning things about U.S. foreign policy in the region over the course of the last decade or so is that in totality, the United States has been trying to drive a consensus in the region that includes Israel. And then at that moment, when there is a consensus, the United States is sort of on the outside. I mean, the United States is really the one that's calling for de-escalation. It's the Biden administration that has been looking for ways to renegotiate the JCPOA, or at least was for the first 2.5 years of the Biden administration. But throughout everything that has happened, governments in the region have wanted to maintain their relations with Israel. Even the Saudis throughout all of this has said, our goal is ultimately normalization of relations with Israel. The price has gotten higher as a result of the conflict in Gaza, but they've never dropped that goal. I'd say, there are exceptions here. The Jordanians have been very outspoken and very, very critical of the Israelis publicly. And there have been lots of protests in Jordan. They've diminished. People are tired. The police have handled them with a certain amount of brutality. But the Jordanian foreign minister has been way, way, way out ahead of everybody and said that the United States should actually impose an arms embargo on Israel. Now, think about it, though. Jordan is at least 65% Palestinian. And the royal court is obviously worried about the instability that might overtake them given the situation in both Gaza and the West Bank. But overall, your point is a good one. Israel's diplomatic relations, particularly with its neighbors, remains mostly stable.